Please note that the following video might contain graphic descriptions of injuries and or murders and may be upsetting to some viewers. Farmmurders, a total onslaught against South Africa. This is part 2 of 2, but maybe not the last of this series. This is the ongoing story about farm attacks in South Africa with Urban Buck. We had some feedback from part 1 and I'll get to that in a minute. Good morning, I'm Klaas and welcome to Urban Buck. Farmmurders is not a phenomenon that just started one day and we started keeping up with the progress of it through the years and started getting stats together. It's something that is got greater meaning and sits in a greater context than a lot of things that's happening in the world at the moment, and that's been happening in the world over time. I've had some feedback from part 1 and I'm going to discuss that with you now. I'm actually going to give a bit more attention to the case than I normally would have, because it's something that's important and something that's been running for quite a few years in two families in the northern parts of South Africa. In part 1 I mentioned the two separate landmine attacks, one of them being the attack that the Donation and Van Eck families were involved in on the 15th of December 1985. Now the two family heads drove on that specific road twice that day without any event, and it was probably the additional load on the pickup truck that set off this landmine. Now Alistair Sparks, at that point correspondent for the Washington Post, mentioned that this was a 55-pound landmine, which is normally something that you would plant for trucks or tanks or something like that. Now, the last respects of the Van Eck family was on the 20th December 1985. The Friday after would have been the burial of the Donation family members. Now, I'm a parent myself, and if I have to bury half my family, and I count the losses and I count the open graves, and I see that there's one grave that's not been dug, it is totally going to destroy me in my heart. The body of Johannes Jacobus Donation, he was 3 years old and he was on the back of the pickup truck, was never found. So there was never closure on that for the Donation family. During the amnesty hearing in Messina on the 3rd of July 2000, Mr. Zafanya Mube said he was given orders to plant these mines as is directed against the white farmers who are part of the Commando as extension of the SADF at the time. As I said, Alistair Sparks, he's passed away since. The article he wrote to the Washington Post dated 20th December 1985, he quotes Dirk van Eck. Tell Oliver Tambo this, he mustn't awaken the tiger in the Afrikaner. Now, Oliver Tambo at that point was the leader of the exiled South African National Congress with their headquarters in Lusaka in Zambia. Van Eck added further on, I hope these murderers understand that if they provoke the Afrikaners, they are provoking a people who can do them great damage. But why doesn't government do anything? As I said in part 1 already, government wouldn't do much. There would be a headline in a major newspaper here and there, which on my part is shilling at its best. It's like telling somebody, I'm your best mate, but I'm hurting you behind your back. The agenda that I'm talking about is not so much race-based, but it's religion-based. It's an age-old battle between God and Satan. Many of the role players are merely pawns in this greater script that's been played out right in front of our eyes. And there's a lot of innocent people involved in this. People that does not really care about what the greater picture is, but they should actually care. Cyril Ramaphosa's statement in 1994 refers to the whites being like a frog in a pot of water. The heat is steadily increased, slowly killing the frog or until the frog jumps out. This is the question by so many South Africans. When is enough enough? Devin Hofmeyer, he is the leader of the Bitter Eindes beweging movement in South Africa. He explicitly asked the Minister of Police, Becky Cele, 2 weeks ago in the town of Brits, said, please give us the privilege to protect our people. The only answer that Cele gave him was a stoical stare, saying nothing. Because I think even Cele knows that if the Afrikaner starts fighting back, there's going to be a battle of epidemic proportions in this country. A question a lot of Afrikaners are asking themselves a lot of times. When is enough enough? When does the frog jump out because the heat has become unbearable? On May the 10th, 1994, the following people took a public oath of office. President Nelson Mandela, Deputy President Thabo Mbeki, Deputy President F.W. de Klerk. Now, on that day when F.W. Klerk was sworn in his turn, he used the words, and I quote, the Father, he swore by the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit when he was sworn in. And for some reason, and I don't know why, because I'm an active practicing Christian, I love God, and I've got an active prayer life, an active relationship with Him through the Holy Spirit. And I didn't know why at the time, but the mere use of that phrase made me utterly, utterly sick. Now, de Klerk was being, the Afrikaner were after de Klerk for many, many years. And they wanted to try for high treason against the nation of South Africa, against the Afrikaner. It made sense at the point, but was the peace process in the new democracy that bad an offense? Years after, de Klerk, who grew up in the Reformed Church, a very conservative movement at the time, started testing Buddhism, and eventually he converted to Islam. And then a lot of things made sense. Independence and democracy. Did it change anything for the rural community? Nothing changed in 1994, except for one thing, and that were the hands at the helm. And the hands at the helm were supposed to steer the ship toward the rocks. Other than that, nothing changed. In this country, nothing. The only day anything in this country would change would be when God comes back to come and collect His people. You see, the reason why the ship was steered towards the rocks was that religious and ideological factions in the world at the time saw the growth in South Africa under Afrikaner and pre-1994. I mean, we had weaponry, we had infrastructure, we had agricultural stability. So if the droughts and stuff that was normal, it was seasonal, we lived under prosperity. And the reason for this fall direction was that those factions saw that a unified Boer nation was a strong nation. Our prosperity came from practicing our faith. We lived according to biblical norms and values. South Africa were mostly Protestant, but there were some strong Pentecostal movements as well. And living as a Christian nation, many believed we were blessed because of that. And that can be proven. We grew up in strict Christian households. I was 18 years old and I was never permitted. My dad saw my hair was getting a bit long, and he said to me, "Sit down, son." And I was in for a haircut. When I left for my national service in the Air Force in 1984, he said to me, "Sit down." I said to him, "Yeah, but they're going to cut my hair." He said to me, "No, you sit down. You're not going for your national services with long hair." I got there and my hair was just about the shortest, but once we went past the barber, everybody's hair was the same. Now, we grew up very strict. The discipline that we grew up under was handed down from our parents, who grew up even stricter. And this alone cultivated a very strong nation. But before long, there were a lot of changes. Politically, there were changes as well. There were the BEE system, the Black Economic Empowerment, that was meant to uplift previously disadvantaged individuals and communities, which is at this stage null and void, because I can take you to some townships and you would see that the new regime or the ANC leadership is doing absolutely nothing to uplift previously disadvantaged communities. Like I said, God was taken out of the schools. That was one of the things. Religious tolerance were brought in, and later, previously taboo practices were legalized. Those taboo rituals was now accepted as normal practice because it was part, like the occults, it was part of a religion, and it was now acceptable. Those were the ones previously banned, but underneath were practices long since in existence that was accepted at that point because it was part of the black culture. We knew about the Sangomas. I was a primary school kid, and I knew that there was a leadership structure, and I'm talking about way in the 70s. I knew already that there was a leadership structure amongst the black people. Before you could do something in an area, you actually had to go. You owned the farm, but for certain things, you had to go and speak to the tribal leader of the area, and he would give his not consent, but his approval. So the balance between the white farmers and the black tribal people were there, and it was quite balanced, and there was some there were respect in both ways. Now these structures and the Sangomas play a vital role in farm attacks and murders in the modern age. Now, prior to 1994, or prior to the elections, or prior to the institution of the democracy, like I say, nothing changed. A lot of people went and bought a lot of toilet paper, a lot of tinned food because of fear-mongering. They said that after the elections and after the ANC takes office, there would be nothing left on the shelves. And that's why I say some people might probably still use some of the toilet paper dating back from 1994. And we fell for it. But nothing changed. The shelves were still packed, factories were still running, but something did change underneath. Our farmers were still under attack, where prior to 1994, these attacks were labeled terrorist attacks, and was widely publicized in a lot of the mainstream newspapers from 1994 onwards. It's as if these things were like swept underneath the carpet. The strategy changed a few levels down. It wasn't so much a terrorist act with explosives and landmines, but it was more a barbaric attack against farmers. Like I say, it changed a few levels down. And I'm not talking about intensity, I'm talking about a few levels down underneath the rug. You see, there was never a plan to make it all go better in South Africa. It was just a change of tactic to start oppressing Afrikaners in a legal and above board way. To give you an idea of these attacks and murders in South Africa post-1994, I'm going to put it up on the screen for you, and I'm going to give you a lot of statistics. And look closely at the statistics that was gathered post-1994. April 1994, just after the new president and his deputy presidents took office, until March 1995. 51 farm murders. For the second next period, the same April to March, April 95 to March 1996, 57 murders. And then from April 1996 to March 1997, there were 84 murders of 433 attacks. April 1997 to March 1998, 153 murders of 490 attacks. Then April 1998 until March 1999, 104 of 201 attacks. That's according to the Transvaal Agricultural Union. According to the SAPS, 144 murders of 827 attacks. So this is one of the dilemmas we're sitting with at this stage, is that the statistics doesn't correspond. April 1999 to March 2000, 145 murders of 832 attacks. That's according to the SAPS. April 99, there's still there is supposed to be April 2000 until March 2001. Apologies for that. 140 murders of 1,069 attacks. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to try and present a case to you. We always say one farm attack or farm murder is one too many. And over these years, starting from 1994 until 2001, I tried to highlight one, but because it's a farm attack, it's something that's close to my heart. Everyone stands out. Criteria such as hijacked to death, tied and bludgeoned to death, burned alive, normally indicates the severity of a case, but it doesn't differentiate one case from the other, because one farm attack or farm murder is one too many. Don't get me wrong, presenting these facts is never easy. It's absolutely not easy. And in some of my previous videos, I broke down. And like I say, I want to present a case to you, and it was difficult singling out this specific one. This case originates from September 1996 in the rural area of Nieuwoudtville on the west coast of South Africa. If my voice or emotions fail me, please forgive me. Let me read it to you. This is the case of Indrina Johanna Elizabeth Lowe, also known as Gansie. She was 57 at the time in 1996, and she was from the farm Heldersig in Nieuwoudtville in the Northern Cape. Also in this case was Julia Fairbanks Smith, 37 at the time, and Emma Lucy Wall, 4 at the time. In the heart of the Karoo, 3 killings came out of the blue, reports writer Mike Nicol. This is about male violence or killers from the veld. It's about random, gratuitous, inexplicable violence. More specifically, about what happened at Nieuwoudtville on Tuesday evening, September 24, 1996. It's about what Captain Paul van der Westhuizen describes as a brutal and senseless attack. The story began a long time ago. It's part of the past. It's part of the present. The details may vary. Griqua bandits raided a homestead in 1830. A hit squad attacks Kwamakutu village in 1987. But its essence is always the same. And it's the sameness of utter violence that causes a moment of terror whenever the story is told. 5 days after the Nieuwoudtville killings, a friend who does community work in the Karoo dorps called to say she was afraid of driving alone on her next trip. She was leaving the next day, and not all the attackers of Nieuwoudtville had been caught yet. You just don't know who is on the road, she said. When a car comes up behind you, you just don't know who is in it. Until then, she's not been paranoid about the Karoo. Suddenly she was unnerved at having to sleep in far-flung dorps. This murder really scares me, she said. In the latest version of our never-ending story, five men came out of the veld, out of the dark, and kill in a frenzy using knives. When they finished, they take a microwave oven, television set, 2 hunting rifles, bits of jewelry, and they disappear fade back into the night. But it's as if these things don't count in themselves. It's as if they are taken merely to put a money value on the wasted lives, to make the point that it was the killing that mattered here. Death in the Landscape, which is how the telling of this new episode in the narrative of South African male violence starts. It's told first as a radio news bulletin on Wednesday, September 25. 2 women and a child have been brutally murdered at Nieuwertville in Bushmanland. From the initial hesitant sentences, the story seemed to invent itself, gathering facts, rumors, possibilities with each telling. First, there is the place. Nieuwertville at that time had a population of 2,300. It's on a road from nowhere, which is from Reinsdorp, to nowhere, Calvinia. It is out there, remote, distant, a tiny settlement at the end of the vast Bokkeveld plains that drop suddenly onto flats that stretch to the unseen coast. At night, the lights of Nieuwertville do not dim the stars. Instead, the immensity of the universe makes Nieuwertville seem even further away. By day there is the Bokkeveld, the Karoo, the ancient heart of the country, and more particularly Bushmanland, a name that raises the ghost of a people massacred. In the dust and in the heat of Bushmanland, it is implied there are restless souls with unfinished business. It's across this landscape that the killers drove on Tuesday, September 24, on Heritage Day. A mostly blue sky day filled with rags of cloud. It was into this landscape that the killers went afterward, when a full moon was up and the rocks on the veld would have shone like silver. The whole veld would have been cast in an ashen light with the mountains rising dark through it. The killers drank liquor as they went over this pale landscape in their stolen cars. Perhaps they talked, perhaps they sang, perhaps they were silent, perhaps some of them slept. The route they took from Nieuwertville was down the escarpment into the Olifants River Valley and the Cedarburg rising sheer and grey cold. Through Clan William, where they abandoned one of the cars, past Citrusdal, Malmesbury, then off the N7 to Atlantis. It takes about 3 hours to drive that route. 3 hours is a long time to sit in a car thinking or not thinking about the killing you have done. Knowing this, knowing the distances that were driven, adds horror of the story. It means that slitting throats, stabbing with screwdrivers, pen knives, kitchen knives, letting so much blood run that it's everywhere on floors, walls, furniture, didn't mean anything to these 5 men driving through the night drinking. It also means that remote isn't remote. Yet people in Nieuwertville thought they were remote. They didn't always lock their doors at night. What for? There was no crime in Nieuwertville. This point was made repeatedly as the story reconstructed itself, as it transferred from cryptic radio bulletin to the urgency of the front page news. People were quoted as saying, "This was my safe haven. We thought this sort of thing only happened in the city. Nothing like this has ever happened before." They came out of nowhere. Yet there were people in Nieuwertville who had seen 5 men driving around in their BMW on a Tuesday afternoon. Nieuwertville is too small not to notice something like that, especially on a holiday. There were people even then who thought that the men were up to no good. But what the 5 were up to do at 9 o'clock that night was beyond imagining. That sort of thing didn't happen in places like Nieuwertville. These natural-born killers, these reservoir dogs belong to the city. In Nieuwertville on that Tuesday afternoon, They were spectres of city horrors, chimeras that would soon drift away. But before they went, they killed. The first person they killed was 2-year-old, almost 3-year-old Emma. She had just finished her supper and had just been put to sleep. They beat her to death in her bed. Her mother Julia fought the attackers, but a frenzy was in the men and there was no stopping their violence until Julia was dead, and so was her host Indrina Lou, and so, they believed, was a supper guest, Johan Verveers. Then, police say, they ransacked the farmhouse and left in their BMW and Indrina Lou's Toyota. Sometime later, towards midnight, Johan Verveers, an off-duty policeman from Kaimus, regained consciousness. He had a penknife sticking in his back. He'd been stabbed repeatedly with a screwdriver. He gazed at the carnage at the tied-up body of Indrina Lou. He blacked out, came to, managed to burn away the cord tied around his feet, managed to get to his pickup, managed to drive to the police station 2 kilometers away in Nieuwoudtville. As the newspapers put it, he raised alarm. A manhunt started, and the story began to form. It was told that Julia Fairbanks-Smith and her daughter had gone out to see the Springveld flowers. They knew Gansie Lou. She was pictured in the newspaper reports, smiling, vivacious short-cropped hair, the opposite of a dorp tannie. In the September veld In September, the veld on her farm Heldersig, a name that would collapse under bitter irony, was a mass of yellow flowers. Later, Gansie Lou's son, Herman Lou, would be photographed in these flowers, his face heavy with grief. It was told that on the night of Tuesday, September 24, Gansie Lou's friend, Johan Verveers, came over for supper. He'd been thinking of making it another night, but they'd settled on Tuesday. After all, it was a holiday. By Wednesday, September 25, he was an ward in the Mary City Hospital in Paarl. By Thursday, there had been death threats from sickos, from gangsters, from those drawn to the savagery, and he was given police protection. By Thursday, there was speculation that the Flower Gang, as the killers had become known, were after money for drugs. Already police were saying that they had forensic evidence which positively linked suspects to the murders. When you examine the background of the known suspects, one could easily assume that the motive for the slaying was to get drug money, said Superintendent Jaco Kamfer of the Springbok Police, who was leading the investigation. There were all kinds of rumors of the drug lords extending the activities up the West Coast, rumors that Johan Verveers had been left alive as a message to all police of what to expect if they messed with drug runners. In many ways, a drug motive ran the story easier to tell. There was a logic here that could be understood. It was no longer inexplicable, although the randomness of the violence was still scary. There was no getting away from it. It made people's sentences trail away into silence as they talked about it. It was worse than anything I've seen in 30 years on the force, said Superintendent Andre Lutz. I can't describe it. In a monotone, Herman Lou talked about the horror when he got to his mother's house as if he were in a Quentin Tarantino movie. The shock was in the description. My mother was lying in her bedroom. Her hands and feet were bound and her throat was slit. The bed and the carpet was covered in blood. Mrs. Fairbanks-Smith's semi-naked body was lying in a pool of blood in the bathroom and her daughter's body was in one of the other bedrooms. There was a photograph of him and his younger brother Wilhelm standing outside the farmhouse on the day afterwards. He is looking straight at the camera, his hands bunched in the pockets of his anorak. His face seems swollen with incomprehension. Willem stands apart from him. He looks down, away from the camera. His face is tight with anger, his hands knotted in fists. There's never any crime in Nieuwertville, says Herman Lowe, staring at the farmhouse where the blood has been washed from the walls and the carpets, although stain still goes on the fabric. His longing is so fervent he uses the present tense. Then the realization of what has happened manifests itself again. We all thought we were safe out here, away from the city. We've learned now that nowhere is safe anymore. But it's not a matter of anymore. It's a matter of always. Of what happened in the years before and what happens now. It's a matter of those Herman Lowe calls murderers. In this case, the accused have names like Charles Adams, alias Chico, alias Charlie Boy, alias Ruggie, alias Andy Brandt, Johannes Breintjies, alias Holland, alias Moonlight, alias Klein Holland, and Douglas Andre Solomons, alias China, alias Dougie. They are names from a nightmare, except this isn't a nightmare. This happened, and it has consequences. 8-year-old Hessie Nieuwoud understands this. She's lived in Nieuwoudtville. 80-year-old Hessie Nieuwoud understands this. She's lived in Nieuwoudtville all her life. She was born there. She wants to die there, peacefully. In 1897, her father-in-law sold his farm to establish the dorp because a centre was needed for the surrounding sheep farmers. Sister, as Hessie Nieuwoud is affectionately known, was the dorp's midwife. For instance, she helped deliver Hansie Lowe. The murder strikes a deep sadness in her soul. She stands in the dim voorkamer, front room of her 1910 kliphuis, stonehouse, for years still sprightly, animated with memories of Hansie pouring off her tongue. Dis 'n verskriklike ding. It's a terrible thing, she says repeatedly. We are one family here. The town and the people in this town are all woven together like threads of a carpet. This will tear everything apart. It's a lightning strike from a blue sky. The last point forms the essence of the killers of the veld on the veld story. It captures the male violence that cracks through today just as it cracks through the past. There are echoes of all this in all the kranses. In the face of the random and gratuitous, everybody is vulnerable and always has been. Those killed in Nieuwoudtville, as much as, say, the unknown man chased by British settlers in the Seerveld on June 10, 1835. He was chased because he was there to chase. He hid in a hole at the side of the river, but the settlers burned the grass until he emerged and then they shot him. It's best not to forget such incidents when the new ones are told. It's best to remember that this sort of atrocity, as Hessie Nieuwoud says, can tear everything apart. 4 men, Larston Chivula, Charles Adams, Johannes Breintjies, and Douglas and Andre Solomons have been charged with murder and robbery in connection with the Nieuwoudtville attack. A 5th suspect, the heavily tattooed David Dog Reiters, was arrested at the weekend after hitchhiking in the Eastern Cape. At the time of going to press, he has been charged with murder in connection with the death on Friday last week of a Gauteng taxi driver. When I started this series, it wasn't the intent to progress beyond part 2, but reading through the history of farm murders in South Africa, I just think it's unfair to the people of this fascinating and beautiful country to not tell you their story and the story of our plight in South Africa. Please do share. Those long gone would want to be remembered. Also, please subscribe and stay tuned by selecting the notification bell. It's just below the video on the YouTube screen. That's all from me for now. I'm working on part 3, and yes, I have got permission and encouragement from a lot of people not to hold anything back. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your day.